Well, Fáilte Róbhas Jack Higgin chéad pod crealú de Ardan. You're all very welcome into the first podcast of Platform in English, or Ardan in Irish. It'll be a monthly podcast in which we invite guests to discuss various aspects of culture, politics, and the divisions within the society we live in. The podcasts are being conducted as part of a year-long celebration of custodianship of the old Broadway Presbyterian Church. So you're very welcome. My guests today are the Rev Marty Mc Neely. Martin, previously, if you were a PR guru up at Stormont, and since then you found yourself in Ballykeel, ministering to the masses. And the other guest today is Winston Irvine. Winston, a member of the PUP, a housing activist in Woodvale, and now for his sins doing most of his work in Kerry. So you're very welcome. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about who Marty Mc Neely is.
Thanks very much, Jack. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, married to Julie, 2 kids, Joshua and Martha. I've been a minister in Ballymena for 14 full years now, and it's in what people call a PUL housing estate, private-public mix. Church is about 120 or so people on a Sunday morning. Very much a local church. Been really involved in kind of grassroots community work there through the church and with the different organisations. So enjoyed that. Spare time, I love sport, all sorts of sport. Spend a lot of time surfing. Everybody knows that. Originally from the northwest, so just on the border. I grew up on a farm just on the border between Tyrone and Donegal, just the River Foyle was at the bottom of where I came from, and moved from there when I was a lad and lived over in England for 10 years in Hampshire, and then moved back, did a degree in politics at Jordanstown, and yeah, that's more or less it.
No problem. Winston, we all are familiar with yourself as an oft-time spokesperson for the Progressive Unionist Party, but who's Winston Irvine?
Well, born and bred, Shangle Roadman, through and through, married, 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. Currently live in North Belfast. Background, obviously strong loyalist background, very much involved in all aspects of community life. I work for an organisation called Intercom Ireland, project manager for them, as you mentioned, working in Carrickfergus Larne currently. Hobbies include cycling. I like the outdoors. I like to also keep myself as fit as possible. As well, enjoy reading and all sorts of sporting activities, from football and anything else that sort of gets me out and about. I suppose a couple of things just to add. Education background would be took a degree from Ulster University and then a master's degree from Maynooth University just recently. So that's
excellent.
A wee bit about me.
Congratulations. Marty, just one of the things you didn't mention in your sporting portfolio was your interest in hurling. So you've at least that in common with Sir Edward Carson, also another keen hurler. But what brings a Presbyterian minister from Ballymena into Belfast to learn how to hurl?
That's a great question. Like, for me, what happened was, well, the long story short was when I moved to Ballymena, hurling's a big thing, obviously not too far from Ballymena, and when I went to Jordanstown, obviously I played a lot of rugby and played a lot of soccer and supported Rangers like typical young prod, but I watched the hurlers at Jordanstown and I thought it was a magnificent sport. So when I moved to Ballymena to work for the Presbyterian Church, I wasn't too far away from the Glens, wasn't too far away from hurling hotspots, and myself and another Presbyterian minister went along one day to watch Antrim play, and I became friendly with one of the officials from the Antrim GAA, and I began to actually develop a real friendship with this particular official from the Antrim GAA, and we began to see that we had a lot in common in terms of fighting mental health and how important sport was in terms of, just trying to help and heal communities. And he talked a lot about how the GAA were doing that, and through initiatives like the half-pace hurling, which is obviously for sort of retired hurlers. It was just an initiative to try and bring hurlers together to have a bit of a puck about, a bit of knock around, guys in their 40s and 50s. It was good for their mental health, and I went along one night up the road here in Forbairt Feirste and was very well received and was the only prod there, and I really enjoyed it. It was, for me, it was just great to get the adrenaline going and just get involved in the sport. And the guys have always respected me and respected where I come from and who I am. They've never, imposed any of their views on me, and they've just been really welcoming. So again, it's part of that wider journey of just not being afraid or embarrassed of where I come from and the people I represent, but also engaging with other people and learning new things. And for me, the big thing was, and I spoke to the people you share with in Ballymena about this, the big thing is the way in which sport can help and heal the mental health, I'm going to say it, pandemic, that we're experiencing. And we went through a season there, sadly, we lost so many people's lives. And one of the things I noticed too was, especially amongst men, like how men were not able to articulate how they felt when they were experiencing depression. And so I've been on a journey to try and look at whatever it would take to try and stop people taking their lives, and whatever it would take to try and improve people's lives. And obviously for me, naturally, as Winston said here, sport is so important, so that's partly why I took an interest in hurling.
Yeah. Okay, Winston, the same sort of question to yourself. You say you're a keen cycler. Obviously, it gets your head out of walking. The epidemic or the pandemic, because it covers so many different communities of suicide, it affects us all. And so, in terms of the community that you come from, what are the initiatives that are being taken to address mental health?
I would agree with Martin's articulation. Is that I actually think we're sitting on a social time bomb when it comes to mental health and indeed suicide. Personally speaking, my own family have had very serious traumatic experiences of suicide. In fact, my wife has lost 4 very close members of her family. And it's almost like when you tell people this story, it's like, hold on a minute, did he just say his wife lost her father, her mother, her uncle and her brother? Like, seriously? So, it's not unusual for clusters of suicides to occur within communities, but to have a cluster within a small family unit is highly unusual. And that's, one example of just the devastation of what suicide is doing to our communities. There are thousands of people, as we know, there's more people who have lost their lives to suicide than were killed during the conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, that statistic in of itself tells you that we have a serious social problem here that we are struggling to get a handle on. And so the community sector is trying to pick up the pieces in many ways. The statutory agencies, as we know, are struggling with the sheer weight of the complexity of all of the health and wellbeing needs across our National Health Service. And this area in particular doesn't receive the attention or the resources that would be sufficient in order to even try to begin to get a grasp of the absolute overwhelming sense of poor mental health within our communities. And there's no easy fix to that, and I think there are lots of intertwined reasons, not least of all I think that intergenerational trauma that obviously is a legacy of the conflict here in terms of the hurt and harm and suffering that we done on each other and was done as a part of this conflict, and the social deprivation and all of the other social complexities that add on to this myriad of what is a tableau of utter chaos and complexity when it comes to mental health. And there are organisations out there such as Extern in Carrickfergus, Larne, for example, where I work, who are doing some fantastic work, but they're not even scratching the surface.
Okay, so I mean, those are some of the commonalities across the society that we're living in. But I'd like now to turn to Miguel and say that one of the other things that we want to focus on as we celebrate custodianship of a building is that idea that you talked about, Marty. How do people be comfortable in their own skin in an area that they don't feel affiliated to? How do we make them feel comfortable in their own skin? You have this whole industry of cross-community work, which does some fine stuff, but it's predicated upon this idea that there's neutral space. And I don't think there is neutral space, and I don't know what the guests feel, but I'm going to ask them. So Winston, I'll begin with yourself. You recently in Brian Rowan's book Political Purgatory said that we are being led to and along different paths to very different destinations. And the outworking of all that and the complexity of that is that sooner or later two very legitimate political aspirations will clash. That's not a very hopeful message, no, but is it real?
But I think it's the reality as far as I see it, and I think there are a number of main reasons for that. I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge that we're managing the conflict here in Northern Ireland as opposed to having resolved it. And that is illustrative of the fact that we have at least two different national identities. We have divisions in terms of culture, in terms of ideologies, in terms of language, in terms of political aspirations, and so on. And therefore, the fact that we have so much division. Look across the city. Such a wonderful view of it that it is, and you can see segregation barriers, so-called peace walls, peace lanes, and a very divided Belfast. And therefore, I think it's right to point out that we are on a collision course. There are two diametrically opposing political aspirations here, and that is unionism wishes to see Northern Ireland remain part of the United Kingdom, whereas Republicans wish to see a unitary state here on this island. And they're very difficult aspirations to bridge, and therefore that creates a particular political culture, and we see the social tensions and the political tensions, and in fact, one might argue that we're on the precipice of a political crisis at the moment with the Northern Ireland Protocol and the instability within our devolved institutions. So that's where that observation came from in terms of the Brian Rowan book.
Okay, well, just an interesting point there, Marty. I want to bat it to you. Winston says all the divisions, we're all aware of them. He says, but we're divided by language. Now, I think that what he meant was the Irish language and the English language, but there is a division built into language and a divisive nature built into language and how we relate to each other, how we speak to each other, or how we define where we're at. Would you like to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do agree with what Winston just said. Positively, I've learned in life, I guess as a gospel minister, practicing, what I'm meant to preach on the ground, I just try and accept people where they're at, irrespective of who those people are, and try and go in with ears open rather than an open mouth and try and listen. So positively, I would say, just in my own community, I've tried to do that, for 14 years now, and I've seen tangible, small but tangible measures of progress and dialogue, and I've dealt with local leaders, people from paramilitary backgrounds and so on, and I've tried to create a space where we maybe away from the publicity and away from the political culture that you speak of, Winston, just try and engage, and have debate and use language positively and look for positive ways in which we can talk about who we are and where we're going, those kinds of questions, and engage with different views. So I think language is really important. I think I've learned this myself. It's very, very easy to use pejorative language or critical language. The fact of the matter is, I've looked at a lot of politicians over the years, and I've always tried to warn to politicians who've used positive language. But the tragic truth is those politicians seem to get nowhere. It seems to be that people just either tack right or tack left and take extreme positions and are always trying to be, as conforming to a prejudice or a particular line which locks them into a trajectory, and there's no other way they're going to change. I just think it's really unhealthy, because I think on the ground away from the political process. I think a lot of really positive things are happening, and a lot of it is happening because people are talking and listening.
Well, I mean, it's stating the obvious to say that Georgia is better than war, but we are in a year where unionism should be celebrating 100 years of its existence, and it's been a year of disaster on the political level for unionism. You have the Brexit, which then led to the protocol. You have that feeding into the volatility of politics at the minute. I mean, we know how easy it is. We don't need to go much further back than April of this year to see how quickly that can translate into trouble on the streets. But even going back to 2012, when people thought things were reasonably settled, it was Sinn Féin's decision to remove a flag from the City Hall that precipitated widespread unrest. So the divisions are there, they're not going anywhere, and I want to pick up on that thing that Marty said and asked you to reflect upon on once. We aren't going anywhere. So, you know, I'm a nationalist, I'm a Republican, you're a unionist, you're a loyalist. We're not going anywhere. This is where we live. So even though we're on diametrically opposed political pages, how can we manage to share custodianship of this city whilst maintaining the integrity of our own political positions, but also respecting that of the other?
Yeah. Look, I thought the title of the conversation for today was extremely instructive, because this idea of celebrating custodianship, you know, one definition of that is, you know, when you're asking someone to take a custodianship role, you're asking someone to take responsibility for something, to look after it, to keep it in good condition. And in this case, for this purpose of this conversation, for me, it's about, you know, the health of the society we're living in and the future for all of our people. And that's a major burden and a great opportunity as well. So that sense of responsibility, I think, is, you know, where I see part of the way through a lot of the quagmire. I think too often, you know, and we've all been involved in discussions and dialogues and engagement and all the rest of it. And look, we have to be honest, that is the most effective way of resolving constructively conflict. When we get to the point where we can sit around tables like this and discuss and debate and put forth our own views and so on. But too often I think we fall into the trap of trying to win over our opponent. And people see, I mean, debate is, you know, the French word for débat, to win. And that kind of sense of, you know, me trying to leave you no shirt in your back when you're walking away from the negotiating table. Or worse still, me going away, you know, with my shirt off my back, and then expecting that to produce durable long-term solutions. So this idea that we can get 100% of everything for ourselves, I think is part of the problem, and part of the focus has to be on understanding that to be focusing on responsibility as opposed to solely focusing on rights. And I think this is an important point, actually, because too often we see this, you know, rights-based agenda, and I completely understand and get that. But what you find there then is that you'll have competing rights, and so, you know, if you're exercising your right, well, that's, you know, most likely going to lead to me exercising my right, and then what happens there? Both of us are exercising our rights, which is, you know, ultimately either you're going to enact yours over mine at my expense, or vice versa. Whereas this sense of responsibility almost has a reciprocity to it. You know, I need to take responsibility for your rights, and that has to have a positive feedback loop. That has to mean then that you take responsibility to ensure my rights, that they are not, you know, in some way demeaned or degraded. And I think too often we set out to try to win, and I think that's the political culture that we're seeing at the moment as well. It's all about winning. That we've almost lost sense of the art of building relationships. And I know we'll probably come to that later in the discussion, but I think, going forward, up to now, I've always been struck by the very small number of people who have been able to manage to keep this place on its tracks whenever we have hit, serious crisis points, whether that's been major issues over contentious issues around culture or political issues, whatever the case may be. It's always been a small nucleus of people who have had the trusted relationships built up over time that have been the thing that's made the difference between this place collapsing into complete and utter chaos, and has been able to manage our way through it.
Yeah. That's very interesting, Marty, about that it rests on a small number of people in reality, that you do have very influential figures right across the community. And one of the things that I toyed with for a while is, how do you get those influential people in the quiet to say, right, let's look at some concrete realities. And the concrete realities are, we're not going anywhere. We're all going to continue to share this place that we live in, whatever we call it, or however it's governed. But what we can commit to, and what we should commit to, and it's taking that point of responsibility, is there can be no return to the violence of the past, no matter what. So even if we're in a negotiation where you feel the shirt's been tucked at your back, we need those political leaders right across the community to say, no matter what, even if the shirt is tucked on my back, there is no return to the violence of the past. And that's it. If you just come in on that, and then I'll invite Winston.
I think, I do agree with what Winston said there, and I think I like that concept of taking responsibility for the other person's rights, and for truly, trying to understand where they're coming from and respect where they're coming from. I totally agree with that. I'll never get you elected, of course, but in this space, but that is the way forward, where we have a genuine accommodation. But I think what does concern me slightly in terms of just analysing the body politic of what's going on is the whole question of empowerment, right? So as Winston said, there's a small number of people probably on both sides. Whenever proverbial hits the fan, whenever there's a breakdown in a peace wall or a peace line, or there's a riot, or inevitably the PSNI have to call in certain power brokers and people and bring youth workers and church workers, bring them together and try and let's just get this calm, and that happens. So you've described there a small body of people who do that and who keep in touch, maybe conferences and dialogue and mutual meetings for over years and years, and that's all well and good. But I do wonder to what extent our fate and our future in this place is actually being governed and decided by wider decision makers and power brokers. So I think this is a situation that maybe unionism is feeling squeezed about, because our fate is being determined, as in this island and this part of the island, is being determined very much by capitalism, if you like, or by industry, or by commerce, from far off places. And where we're heading as a people is very much shaped by outside forces now. We're so interdependent, both within the context of the British Isles and Ireland and the European Union, but also on corporate giants. So I read a statistic there in the Irish Times a couple of weeks ago, which said that 25% of all of the energy on this island now is being used to cool data banks which belong to corporate, the Facebooks, the Googles and so on in Dublin. And I thought, well, that's a magnificent, incredible statistic. Like 25% of our energy. And it's consuming so much energy. Irish policymakers have to think carefully about, how they're going to keep the lights on over Christmas. They're maybe going to have to talk to Britain about shared electricity interests. So these are the kind of conversations going on at a macro level. And I wonder to what extent your average kid on the Shankill Road or in Ballymena or wherever, even on Falls Road here, to what extent are they part of this wider dynamic of a changing body politic on let's call them the British Isles or the European Union, whichever way you want to look at it. So, I just think that capitalism has changed the fate of this island enormously. And I can't see that process slowing down.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because
Sorry, could I just finish on that? Just before. To what extent, we talk about unionism, nationalism, to what extent actually is our fate now being determined by cities rather than political nations? Like London, Dublin, Brussels, New York.
Yeah.
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But that one, I mean, the political instability that we've had since 2016 was directly as a result of macroeconomics. It was a desire by the English nationalists to reclaim what in a sense was a lost empire, to reclaim back some control of their own society, and Europe's desire to force integration. We're very much a sideline in that. I mean, the 27 heads of the European governments literally look at what's going on in the north of Ireland, and their only interest is to not rock the boat. They don't want to destabilise it. They don't want peace to end. But in reality, we're a tiny region attached to a set of islands which is no longer part of Europe. So the European Union will increasingly ensure that their interests, and that's all governments. Governments don't have friends, they don't have allies, they have interests, and they pursue those interests. So, I mean, how do we, as a fairly small, we're 1.5 million people.
I think Martin raises an extremely important and valid point, because, you know, whilst, you know, the point was made about here at a local domestic level, you know, there are, you know, a small number of what some people have described as a sort of family of peace builders almost, who have been, you know, able to help manage it with others, you know, the trials and tribulations of this place. But we can't divorce ourselves from the fact that we have these wider external forces at work that are incredibly influential and very powerful. They're a force of nature in many respects. And you had mentioned about 2016, which is, I think, was a reference to Brexit. And, you know, I think we can set that even in a wider context again, because I think what we're seeing is actually a restructuring of the global superpowers as well. And you can see the turbulence of that, you know, right across the world now, with, you know, the rise of China, Russia, and, you know, the West having to try to reorientate itself and, you know, make geostrategic political decisions about where they're going to try and focus the concentration of where they see their best alliances land. And, you know, see Australia and the UK and America very recently beginning to restructure slightly a new set of alliances at the expense of the French and in Europe in some respects. So, you know, that is an incredibly forceful and very powerful dynamic, and the Brexit debate and the subsequent referenda result, you know, brought that from the very high level down to the local level for us here in this place. And none of us know what that's going to look like, because it's unprecedented. There's nothing to compare it with. There are no parallels at this stage. So this idea that, well, Brexit's going to be good, or it's going to be a major success, or it's going to be a disaster, quite frankly, we don't know. It's too early to know. But one thing is for sure, things are changing, and they're going to continue to change. And I think we as a society need to gear ourselves up for understanding that change is inevitable, and not to be afraid of it. And for all of the external outside forces at work, I think the most important thing that we can do is domestically get our house in order in terms of stabilising what we can, protecting the peace process, making sure that we create opportunities for everyone, and build a safe, prosperous society at a domestic level. And that, I hope, would then ultimately offset the tremors of those bigger turbulences that are coming.
Well, I like the idea that Marty came up with, where let's talk about this in terms of the kid in the shackle, kid in Tullycarnet, or the kid in Ballymurphy. You know, they are in this changing world, but they're also hugely socially deprived. They're also without any great hope our vision. And in many ways, lots of our politicians are selling them short. You know, the huge challenge there is, how do we give young people in this place hope? How do you begin to, you know, it's okay for us to talk about these outside forces, but if you're living on a 2 up, 2 down flat, and the back end of Tully Carnet, and your only highlight of the week is 4 tins of beer,
Yeah.
you know, there's not much there that is needed to get you out burning a bus. You know, if you feed that anger or you feed that sense of alienation, so it comes back again to Marty's observation that politicians need to be very measured in what they say. They need to know that words are very powerful, but down at the domestic level, because I think once we come below that big political slugout, which is always going to happen, at a community level, how do we change that dynamic?
I think, you know, a very practical thing we could do would be to find agreements to the outstanding issues that are causing the instability here, because I think you know that rise in political tension ultimately manifests itself in terms of social tensions, and we know that, you know, working class, low income, deprived communities tend to bear the brunt of that instability, and in particular young men, young people. And therefore I think there is an onus on us to find a way, for example, and like, we know there's not a panacea out there around how we deal with the past, but it is poisoning the well in which we all sup from. And that, for me, is an indictment on all of us who try to make a contribution in that space. So getting issues such as how we deal with the past, getting that monkey off our back without being disrespectful to those who have been bereaved and suffered and who continue to live with that suffering on a day and daily basis. But it's in no one's interest for us to continue with the inertia around that issue. Likewise, you know, the contestations or the confrontations around the divisions around culture, whether it's language or around flags or parades or bonfires, we need to settle this place down. Like, this place just feels as if it's been constantly kept on the boil, where everybody's hiding behind the chaos of their own tribal interests. And that, to me, there's no winners in that game. And therefore, if we are thinking about practical, pragmatic responses, that's the type of stuff that we need to be focusing on. Why? Because if we get that historical legacy stuff sorted out and we address the big contentious issues left over from the peace process, then we can then begin to focus on those social and economic issues, addressing mental health with proper investment, proper strategies, addressing issues that allows people to, you know, access the labour market for good jobs, educational opportunities, good housing, and so on and so forth. Because at the moment, all of those issues, quite frankly, are way down the pecking order.
Yeah, but I mean that draws me to that thought that, you know, that war is simply the continuation of politics by other means. But what our process has taught us is that politics is the continuation of war by other means. You know, all we've literally achieved is an absence of violence or a relative absence of violence. But all of those issues that are there haven't been addressed, they haven't been laid to rest. So I want to try drawing the threads of this in and just get you, Marty, to reflect on what's Marty Mc Neely custodian of and how you're going to exercise that custodianship going forward.
Well, obviously, I'm a Presbyterian minister, so that means I'm, as we call him, a Calvinist. We've just an interpretation of life which says that nothing happens by accident, that life is a gift. The calling I have is a gift. The community I've been given to minister to is a gift. It's a blessing. I've been through real trauma and hardship. It's been a privilege to serve and to work with a community that I have done. So in so much as I'm a custodian of that, I would want to try and continue to live unselfishly, try and set aside my own prejudices and just be open and listen to my own community for a start, which is riven with class. differences as well as we have internal class problems, you know, and particularly in the Unionist Loyalist community, and then within the context of wider Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland, you know, I personally still want to try and engage with people from different traditions, different backgrounds, because with so much more in common than we do, you know, apart, and the mental health crisis has driven me to that conclusion very much so. And I'm personally happy and content actually in my own walk that I've engaged with different people from different backgrounds. And 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the Apostle Paul says, to the Jews, the Jew, the Greeks, the Greek, all things to all people, you know. So for the sake of the gospel, that's the way I look at life, and I'm content and fulfilling that in my own walk in ministry. But it's not without its challenges. And I do think I am apprehensive about the future. I agree with Winston. I think politicians need to be very careful what they say over, particularly this next political cycle. There's a direct relationship between political rhetoric and the behaviour of young lads on the ground. Direct relationship. You know, whenever there's tension politically, that does feed into how young men particularly react certain times of the year. And it is young men, as you say, Winston. So I think it's very important that politicians use careful language. But generally, I'm very thankful, as I've said, for the position I have. I'm very thankful for the fact that there are good leaders on the ground, and even opportunities like this are good because it allows us to explore those spaces that maybe politicians don't because they're locked in competitive battles.
Well, that's it. We're fortunate in that we don't have to get elected. Winston, you're a custodian of a loyalist ideology, a loyalist viewpoint, and also of the community from which it comes. So how do you exercise? What are the opportunities? There are lots of challenges, but what are the opportunities that you can bring to bear?
I think that for me, I'm a custodianship of trying to take responsibility for my own actions, to try to be measured, particularly in the public sphere, because words do matter. And, you know, I certainly don't want to be, you know, making things any more difficult than what they already are for our communities out there. So I think being responsible about how you articulate your own views and your own positions around issues that are, you know, extremely contentious. But I think more than that, more practically, I think, you know, I certainly have a commitment to doing all that I can to help resolve and play a meaningful role, and a small contribution I think I have to make around some of these key issues. And I think just to add to that as well, I think there's also an onus to present what a future of this place can look like in a way that doesn't threaten nationalists, that doesn't threaten Republicans, and at the same time allows nationalists and Republicans to see the vision of their aspirations alongside my vision of what I want to see Northern Ireland being. And look, I think to think about, you know, more referendums, border polls, especially given where we're at the moment, I think is storing up major trouble. And I say that respectfully, and I'm not trying to in any way remove, you know, anybody's right to that very legitimate aspiration. But I think we need to take ownership and custodianship of bringing about actual reconciliation. You know, look across this city, you can see the division, you can see the segregation, you can see the sectarianism. It's omnipresent, and unless and until we begin to address the root causes of conflict, I can't see how we will be able to think about new future arrangements without causing serious instability that goodness knows where it could lead us.
Okay, look, well, thanks a million for having joined us. Reverend Marty, have you a final message for your view in public?
I think interdependency is the way forward. We are going to enter into a season of change, border pool or not, and the ramifications of Brexit are going to work their way out. There's demographic change going on in Northern Ireland, and that is going to impact the way the island is going to change, there's no doubt. But it's not going to change in a way which is going to be divorced from a relationship with a kind of wider body politic of Britain, because it can't. London and Dublin are so interdependent at so many levels. So I think that as one local journalist has said, there is going to be debate going forward, but everything has to be on the table, like everything, and we don't have to be afraid of that. And I also think just one last thought would be, I think organisations on the Catholic national side, I think the GAA play a really big role in terms of helping young men, especially, develop positive mental health attitudes. I think on the Protestant loyalist side, if you like, I think the Orange Order, maybe some of the flute bands also really need to, I hope, just embrace the opportunity they have, the influence they have with young men, and maybe even there could be scope for maybe the Orange Order and the GAA to start talking together about joint initiatives and ways in which those cultural groups, cultural and sporting, that they could maybe come together and start dialoguing about young men in particular, because that's the area of expertise I'm reading on and working in, and I think there's huge opportunity for collaboration at a grassroots level, again probably away from the body politic, but at a grassroots level where people can talk and say, how do we develop good communication amongst men, emotional intelligence, resilience, so that as we do face changes, we learn how to judge on, not war, as you say.
And Winston, a final thought for you from...
Yeah, I suppose similar to Marty, I think we need to continue to discuss and to debate, and not in a way to win, but in a way to better understand. And look, I don't expect these communities to take down the walls and sing kumbaya together and let's all hug and let on, everything's great. That's not going to happen. I think we need to learn to live with difference, learn to live with the fact that we do have different affinities, we have different affiliations, and that those differences need to be managed out, but they need to be managed out with face-to-face discussions, and in a way that solutions are found for equal and mutual benefit. Because if we are trying to win every time we go to the negotiating table, we'll be continually returning to the negotiating table, because those solutions won't last. And I think lastly, just to say that I think the importance of good, strong, imaginative leadership at this stage is required more than ever, because the challenges out there are going to get more pronounced as we see the economic bite of the slowdown of global economies and so on. So I think we need to be ready to step outside our own differences and not be afraid to engage with people from different backgrounds. And I think unionists and loyalists in particular have a bit of a fear for that, because there's almost this kind of taboo around, well, if I go into a room with a Republican, like I might come out a lesser unionist. Well, actually, any time I went into a room with a Republican and came away, I've come out more pronounced in my own self-belief in who I am and what I am, and like nobody's trying to change who I am, and I'm not trying to change who someone else is. So I think my message would be for people to not be afraid to step out from their own flock.
Okay, on that note, and to quote our French Gallic cousins, vive la difference.